You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, the podcast for marketing professionals in higher education. Join us every week as we talk to the industry's greatest minds in student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where marketing in higher ed is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast. My name is Troy Singer with Ring Digital, here with Bart Kaler of Kaler Solutions. And today's guest is Randy Byers, Vice President of International Affairs and Assistant Professor of Distance Learning at Dallas Baptist University. Our topic today, international student recruitment and generative AI. With more than 25 years of experience spanning technology, online education, and international engagement, Randy brings a global perspective to how institutions can expand their reach and build meaningful connections with students around the world.
It was a lot of fun having Randy on the podcast today. I met him in person this summer when I was down at DBU doing some presentations on generative AI, and he was asked to come and join the conversation. And so Randy's great. That's how I learned about him, was through the engagement with generative AI. But the more I got to know Randy, the more I realized how astute he is in international student recruitment. And I was like, man, we got to get him on the podcast. Do we talk about AI? Do we talk about international recruitment? Well, let's just do both. And so we brought him on. And so it's a lot of fun because I think that he's talking about how he's applying generative AI to help with his international recruitment in some really creative ways. And so it's been a really fun conversation, which I'm excited to share.
Yeah, like I shared with him, I am not as familiar with international recruitment, and it was so interesting for him to go into that conversation, plus weave generative AI into it. So I won't hold back any longer. Here's that conversation with Randy Byers. Randy, we always start our podcasts by asking guests to share something interesting or surprising that they've learned recently. So what's something that's caught your attention or you've recently learned that our audience might find interesting?
You know, that's a really great question. And, I'm always trying to improve my staff. Always trying to look for the next new thing. Where are we looking at? We just finished the book Unreasonable Hospitality recently. If you haven't checked that out, it's amazing. One
of my favorites.
Yeah, just absolutely great. So I was looking for a new book, and I came across this book by Dr. Dan Allender, and it's called Leading with a Limp. And boy, what with a name like that? I mean, you got to get into it. And I think it's really, contrarian in the sense of what we're usually taught. As the leaders, we're supposed to be out in front. We've got the vision. We've got the mission. And he brings this idea that, from a faith perspective, especially, that there's this idea that sometimes we need to be the one that's doubt ourselves a little bit, that we aren't sure of our ideas. Maybe we step back and say to ourselves, as the leader, I don't have all the answers. And I think this has really been important for me. I deal with a lot of C-suite folks. I'm in the conversation. And a lot of times we are very forceful. We know what our plan is. We come to the meetings ready to go. And for me, understanding that I don't want to be the smartest person in the room. I want to surround myself with the smartest people in the room. Yeah. Listen to the ideas and humble myself. If I'm going to grow and develop, I can't have all the answers because there's no room for growth. So I think for me, that's been a really interesting take that I hadn't really thought of before.
Thank you for sharing the book, and thank you for sharing those thoughts around it. It got me to thinking, and I look forward to reading the book. Now, getting into the meat of the conversation that we wanted to highlight with you, Randy, rethinking international recruitment and partnerships. Want to start out from the very beginning, and I hope this isn't too tough of a question, but what are some of the most common misconceptions that you find universities have about international recruitment today?
Yeah. I think we kind of had this vision maybe over the last 15 years, and it's continued to evolve as people began to see international recruitment as easy money. Hey, I can go out and legally, we can operate in a different way than we can with American students on the recruitment front. So with American students, you're limited in how you recruit them. There can be no per head basis and those kind of things because they're getting federal funding through scholarships and through federal aid. But with international students, there's this whole movement to be able to use third-party reps that are out there that come in and help build it for you. You sit back in your easy chair and you wait for the money to roll in, right? Well, let me tell you, there is nothing that can be further from the truth. I have seen schools grow their international programs, and then a year later, 2 years later, those programs are cut in half. And what happens is you have to have a support network. Mm-hmm. So at Dallas Baptist University, we spent the last 40 years building out step by step a whole system that's in place to support those students. Everything from, hey, how do they get from the airport to your campus? You may not be in a place like Dallas where I'm only 20 minutes from the airport. You may be out in some small town somewhere. How are they going to get there? What about language? Most of these folks speak language, the English is their second language. So there's not this easy navigation of all the things that we take for granted, right? They may know English, but some of the way we speak, especially here in the South, we've got our own thing going on. Some of our viewers here may wonder, well, I can't really understand him. He's from Texas. Well, I tell you, those kind of things also go through our international. So we really deal with some cultural expectations, and I think schools don't always anticipate that. And then the pushback from your faculty. Faculty, all of a sudden, they've got, 400 students in their engineering classes from India, and they're like, what do I do with these students? They come from a completely different background. So when their educational system, they are taught to be very much math and science oriented. So the liberal arts is very different for them. The idea is a collective. So their educational system is collective. And so it's more about community. And when we talk about academic integrity, sometimes that's a really foreign concept for them. Because in their culture, when they quote somebody or they pull some paper in and they don't cite it, it's not because they're having an academic integrity issue. It's because they are doing what they do over there. And so when they come here, I think schools really don't know how to deal with that. And all of a sudden, you've got all of these academic integrity issues when you started recruiting international students. So there is a lot to take in. There is a lot of support that has to be in place to make that really work well.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because I know that, you just gave some great examples. And so I'm curious, just kind of what are some of those practical things at institutions? Like if somebody's listening and they're like, that sounds great, Randy. Yeah, we're experiencing that. What are some of those practical things that institutions can take to kind of better understand the cultural nuances? So like you said, I've got a professor, I've got, 6 Indian kids in my class. I don't know much about them, or Nepal or whatever it is. How can they actually start to do things practically to build those authentic relationships to really help those students, 1, feel at home, 2, succeed and thrive, and 3, retain? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm a big fan of Covey, first seek to understand, right? So, and I think this is a great example of where, from a cultural perspective, we don't go and we don't run someone else, our view of someone else through our own cultural filter. We have to say, listen, I'm going to humble myself and step back, and I want to know about who you are. Where did you come from? What is that, what is it like for you? Why would you come to the United States to be able to study and to understand what brings you joy? What brings you sadness? What are the things that as an individual you're hoping for? A lot of our international students, they want the American dream. Mm-hmm. We I think have in some ways lost the American dream. Some of our folks even today feel like the American dream is no longer there. But I can tell you, for those international students who are legally going through the process the right way, that American dream is a big deal. So we can take time to understand their motives and where they are. Second thing we can do is you can have boots on the ground. And that means getting your faculty, your staff, your leadership all the way from the top over into these countries. They need to go take time. So at my university, at DBU, we always send people from the top up. It's a requirement for all of our vice presidents and our deans that they go travel internationally. They have to. And we want them to be in these classrooms abroad. We want them seeing how their students are taught. We want them interacting with students in their homes, their families, and they get a different perspective of what life is like. And I tell you what, it'll wake you up to realize both how similar we are, but how different we are as well.
Right. That's great. And just as you kind of talked about that, I mean, I love what you're saying there. And I know at the beginning, I'm going to go back to what you said at the very beginning, is that this isn't just sitting in your easy chair or hitting the easy button and watching the money roll in. So I know a lot's changed. I mean, a lot of schools were using those recruiters. There's different, elements in our political context and the culture right now that are affecting international recruitment. So where do you think these trends, or where are these new markets? What do you think is going to help shape this next generation of international recruitment strategies? Because I think we're kind of, in a lot of ways, having to rethink what we're doing and how we're doing it. And you keep referencing the legal way, and I know there's legal ways to do that, but even some of the F1 visas are kind of, there's gray areas right now for some of that.
Yeah, no, I've been doing international work for over 20 years now. And it seems like I have to change my strategy about once a year. I have to go in and recalculate. It's just like balancing a portfolio as a fund manager. You think to yourself, okay, where am I going to get students this year? Where is the market leading me? Because as you're dealing with the entire world, it's very complex as a international recruitment strategist. You're having to look and see, okay, where are the economic issues? Where are, this government has got a new government and now they're not as friendly to the United States. So does that mean that the U.S. is going to push back and use the leverage of visas, which they do quite often? They leverage the tools they have for geopolitical reasons. That's the way governments work. So I think for us currently, the way that we need to look at is the idea that you can have 25% of your campus coming from one or two countries. That is a bad idea. And I think some of our institutions are finding that out, and that you can't just have, all the students from India or all the students from China. You need to have a portfolio and be out actively engaged across the world. We're a fairly small school. I've got between 500 and 600 international students here, and we're pulling from about 60 different countries. I would, honestly like to see something in the neighborhood of probably 70 or 80 countries, even more broad than where I'm at now. So that's one of the things that you need to do. The other thing is that you've got to advocate. You have to advocate for yourself in terms of the strategy. You have to go out and sell yourself to the international community. A lot of times what they're looking at are rankings. And I think we all know rankings, are a great marketing tool, but they're not always accurate. Everybody has a ranking. I can find something to be ranked at. And so I think we need to sell what is not the ranking, but why are you different? Why are you special? And from a perspective of like a faith-based institution, we're going out and saying, hey, we're in a place not only that's safe, not only where your parents can feel comfortable with you coming here and getting the education, a high quality education, but we're a place that really values loving people. We are a place that values, your international perspective is important to us. And so you have values that each of your institutions, everybody's institution is different, that are important for people to know about.
That's great. I love that. And I love the fact that you're constantly pushing further ahead. I mean, just the idea of, expanding your portfolio, when you think about 70 or 80, that's a few from each country by the time you get to 500 or 600. And I know that takes effort, because even, before we turned on the recording, we were talking about some of your travel coming up, and man, you're traveling all over the world. And I think that it goes back to what you said earlier, is that it takes work and it takes effort. There's no easy button to this. And so really appreciate some of those insights, Randy. Yeah,
and if I can just kind of add to that one little thing, and we talked about that sitting in your armchair, boots on the ground. Yes, it's in all countries, and that's expensive. It is expensive. And so that's another thing that schools, as they're looking at how I'm doing recruitment, they have to understand you're going to have to make an investment. Yeah. This is not going to happen by taking one trip a year and going to an education fair someplace. You're going to have to be out making relationships. And I know we'll probably get into that more later, but to me, that's the crux of it is, you're building a relationship with people, and that's what helps sustain you through difficult times. When you have a relationship, people will continue to come.
Yeah, one of my favorite words is intentionality.
Absolutely.
And there's so much of what we do requires intention. So
Randy, now we would like to ask you about leveraging generative AI without losing the human touch. So as someone who bridges technology and education, how do you see generative AI transforming enrollment marketing and communication with prospective students?
Yeah, no, I think we're seeing right now almost all of the major products integrating AI. I mean, you can't turn around without hitting some product that says I have AI in it, right?
Yep.
And whether or not it's good AI or whether the AI is actually helpful is another question. I think for us, as we're looking to communicate, the big killer app, of course, is translation. And I cannot emphasize enough. If I were to look at, and I spend a lot of time working with AI. In fact, I spoke last night at a financial conference on AI and finance. And so I'm looking at it from all different perspectives. But for me and for my money, AI being able to automatically and quickly translate effectively from language to language for an international international division is the killer app. So I can produce materials. I can produce a single video with me talking, and I can put it into something like a HeyGen or one of these other tools, and it will go out and actually look like I'm speaking Spanish, look like I'm speaking Portuguese, look like I'm speaking Chinese, right? And it's convincing. In fact, it's so convincing, it's a little spooky, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But I'm speaking someone's heart language is really important. And so I think that's one of the ways that we're going to see it transform. I think another way we see it transform is the way we do, how we evaluate applications. I don't know about other schools and how they do it. I'm sure they get thousands and thousands of applications just like we do. And trying to get through all of those essays, trying to get through all of these, if you're not familiar with international admissions, we have to take international transcripts and find some way to be able to convert them onto a system we can understand. So, if I'm getting one from China, it looks pretty close to what we have, other than maybe the language, but a lot of times they're in English. But I get something from India, which is a mark sheet that has now got 78 pages. And and I'm not lying, some of these things I get are that long. And I need something to be able to actually go through and convert that. We spend so much time converting it. We could send it to a service, but then we're getting charged a couple $100, or the student's getting charged a couple $100. So we want to be able to be more efficient and effective. And I think AI on those type of lower level tasks, like helping us to translate things within context, helping us to, tell me what the scale is. Is this a 4.0 scale, or is this on a scale of 1 to 100 or 1 to 50, whatever it is? It can automate, and we can build that into the system to do that. So those are things effective on the mission side. On the communication side, man, it's just the idea of giving somebody something that is tailored to them. And I don't really like the idea of this complete automation.
Right.
I'm much more in the augmentation camp. I believe human in the loop all the way. So I would say I'm not really for just having automatically send out a customized, personalized email that nobody has looked at. But as if you've got your recruiter in the system and he's looking and it's already helped pre-write going, oh, well, I've been to that country. And it knows him. It knows the student that's applying, and it can craft something that they can then edit and send out that, helps to speed the process, but also still connection. I really see AI being used at the lead generation stage, at the prospect stage, at the initial application stage. But once we get past application stage, I want everything to be personalized and to be really human to human at that point.
Yeah, I love that. I love that augmentation rather than replacement. I mean, I think that's what we teach in our AI classes. That's that you and I have had conversations about AI outside of this today. And so, but I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of people forget, or they don't realize that we can move from efficiency to enhancement. And that enhancement is our humanness. It's the relationships. It's what we can do. So I love you've got some guardrails about that. But going back to your HeyGen example, because that's something that I've been playing with as well, is those translations. And I know that ChatGPT does okay. There's better tools out there to actually doing some of the translations that and I can certainly get those to people if they want it. But one of the questions I always get is just this idea of this ethical or cultural challenge when I'm representing myself as a native speaker, whether it's in Spanish or Chinese or whatever else. It is convincing enough that I think that there's a risk that the student on the other end will see that, and all of a sudden you're at a fair in Beijing, and you've got a whole family coming up talking to you because they assume that you speak Mandarin quite well because they saw it on the video. Talk about that. How do you kind of work around that? Because I mean, there's students that are going to see those videos and then you're going to meet them in person because you're traveling so much. So just unpack what you're doing with that and how that works.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is disclosure. Letting people know you're using AI tools. And this is something we're not seeing enough of, just across the board. Is people are producing content with AI, they're doing things with AI, and there is no notice that, hey, AI was used to do this. And not only was it used, but this is how it was used. Yeah. And so, anytime that we produce something, we're pretty upfront. Okay, this is AI generated. And there's a real trust issue. So there's a thing where called human favoritism. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it is the idea that actually when the studies are done, people trust AI and its results actually pretty well. They feel pretty confident. It's honestly kind of surprising how confident people feel in AI produced things. But if they believed it was you, and then it comes back and they feel like, oh, he lied to me, it completely breaks the trust. Yeah, and this is what you're getting at. And so if you're not disclosing that, then certainly there's an ethical issue. But this human favoritism says that as good as we think the AI is, we would accept the AI if you tell us it's AI. But at the end of the day, if a human tells me that this is true, it's actually we're gonna trust the human even more. And so it's not like there's a distrust of AI. It's just that you're better off actually doing it. But there are cases where just the fact that you can translate it, that's going to be something that's probably worth a little bit of risk there, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I love the idea of being able to disclose it. One of the ways I've told people to use it is like, you start your video by saying, isn't it amazing that we live in a world where we have technology where I can speak to you in your heart language or whatever you want to say. Okay. That's a good way to start those videos as opposed to just making them just reading the script that ChatGPT generated for you. I mean, you've got to, it's that human to human type of thing that you've got to do. And so I think it's really important that we maintain that empathy and authenticity. But I think as we do more automation, and I love the fact that you've kind of identified even in your funnel that, we're going to do it in the top of the funnel. We're going to do kind of, up inquiry app. And then once we get through accepted, we're changing. I think that's really important. And I think that I just want to point that out to the audience because I think that we're going to lean into automation. Whether you like it or not, automation is going to be a part of your life in the next couple of years. The important thing is how do you maintain that empathy and that humanness and that AI should be freeing you up to spend more time in relationships and talking to people as a human, as opposed to just, being a dashboard of doing all these agents. And so help me understand from your perspective, when we think about things like that, we see the automation that's coming, we see the opportunities and maybe even some of the risks of doing it the wrong way. What skills or mindsets do you think that enrollment and marketing leaders should start really honing in on, as you're kind of stepping back now as an AI expert that you are? And what are those things that you think that beyond the tools, I mean, we can talk about tools all day long, but what are those mindsets or those skills that you think are most important for our listeners?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is you have to know what your goal is, right? I think, are you just trying to sell something to someone, or are you trying to make a connection? What is the ultimate goal, and how do you keep from letting it go off the rails? So I think there has to be an ethical consideration. Now, we live in a world where people don't like to think about ethics much. We kind of live in a utilitarian or a pragmatic world where people are like, as long as at the end of the day it worked, I got my result, then it doesn't matter what the fallout is. And with AI, this is really important that people understand AI, what it is and what it isn't. Okay? Because if you understand that AI will do everything possible to get to that end result, yep. That's the way. It's not like a traditional program where we program a set of rules, we know exactly what it's going to do. It's a black box. And you can create all kinds of ethical issues, including bias and other things that can be incorporated that you may never see. And so I think there's got to be this really high level of AI literacy about the fact that AI, one, is not thinking. I think it is really good at guessing the next word, guessing the next idea. AI itself is not this conscious thing that sometimes people, I think, assume that it is. It's really a good pattern recognition system. And because of that, if we utilize that, we can. But because of it does that, it looks at our old data. So if we've had bias in the past, like particular regions of the world where we didn't typically admit for some reason, we admitted less. And it's going back and basing that your admissions decisions, if you're using it to help with admissions decisions, it may tend to say, well, maybe this is a lower score on your hot level,
Right.
heat level, So I think we got to have some proficiency in ethics. We need people that are literate and proficient in understanding what AI is and isn't. And that, the tools that our folks need to be understanding is if they can't assume that what was true yesterday is going to be true tomorrow. That's another thing. And I think as a professional, we have never seen the level of technology progress as fast as AI progresses. It blows my mind. I mean, you can comment on this as well, but I would say maybe 6 months ago, I would try to get AI to hallucinate. It was very easy. Now I go into ChatGPT and try to get it to hallucinate, and the things that used to work really easily no longer work. And so they have continued to get better. And as it's been said so many times, this is the worst it will ever be. All right. And we know that it's just going to get, so people can't assume that what they knew 6 months ago is going to be true going forward or even today. And so I think there's got to be this idea of constantly your professionals are going to be updated on where AI is at, and not just the tools, but just in general, where is this technology going?
Yeah, I love that point, and I think you're exactly right. I think AI literacy, and I'm starting to talk about media literacy as well, because I'm really worried that the amount of, especially from the Sora moment, I've got a friend who's been calling it the iPhone moment for AI, where all of a sudden you can generate anything with anybody, and it's pretty convincing that you're, within a few months, we're not going to be able to tell the difference between AI and right. reality. And so I think there's a lot of challenges we have to think about in having AI literacy and understanding what it is and what it isn't. I loved your example talking about, the fact that it's following patterns and it's a black box. We don't know. I mean, there's a famous theory. It's called the paperclip maximizer. It's a thought experiment that Nick Bostrom put several years ago, a couple decades ago. But the idea that if you tell AI that their goal is to make as many paper clips as possible, we think, oh, that's a great idea. Let's let that happen. But then if you play through that his theory is that it starts to, take over the world to be able to gather resources to build paper clips. And it's the end of humanity because humans aren't necessarily needed to build paper clips now that they've built robots. And it's kind of a fun little thought experiment. But that shows you how if you've got these black boxes that they're just set to do a goal, where does that stop? And so again, I'm not trying to bring in dystopianism or the Terminator, but that's where the ethics and everything around this we need to start thinking a little bit deeper about.
I think the really difficult thing with a technology like this is, and I always go back to this, is I think the most benign technology that I ever came across was like social media. It seems, my grandma gets to see her grandkids on one of these social media sites. And yet now, after a couple of decades of social media, we see it's toppled governments. We see it creates echo chambers, all the negative things that have come from social media, and what seems like would be a very benign technology. And then we think about something like AI, which for me personally, I believe is categorically the most influential technology that has ever been created. And because of that, we have no idea. We have absolutely no idea what the consequences of AI are going to be. So we have got to be on top of it. And I think, that's the human race, not just the professionals working in our industry. That's all of us. And I'm not saying, again, that's going to come get us. But what we need to do is be on top of the consequences. And there needs to be some type of regulation and somewhere in the middle that doesn't stifle innovation, but also keeps us from getting out there where things kind of fall apart.
Yeah. I heard somebody the other day say, well, when all this hype settles down about AI, I'll take a look at it. And I was like, good luck with that. So
right.
Randy, the last topic we would like to ask you to discuss with us today is preparing the next generation of global leaders. So as the world continues to shrink, how should institutions be thinking about preparing globally minded leaders?
Yeah. the world is shrinking in many ways. The technology has closed the gap. We're going to have language, AI, for instance, we talked about with language, will close the gap. I mean, I literally had a conference here over the summer where everybody had a earbud in their ear, and whatever language they spoke, they were hearing it in their language, and it was 98% accurate. It was great. So these are things they cause the world to shrink, but there's also, as we're seeing in the geopolitics, the world is pushing back against that. And I think, there is the closing of doors. Isolationism is appearing. We see the world kind of pulling apart. And what we do not want is to lose the really great benefits of globalization, internationalization, which is peace. Which is the opportunity. And so in order to create these global leaders, we need people who are dedicated to peace. We need people who are dedicated to not just tolerating others, but loving others and taking people and, and understanding where they're coming from and being able to, again, I talk about being humble a lot because I think it's so important that we not believe that our entire systems are all that can be. There's definitely, other people that are living, great lives, doing great things with a totally different system. And that doesn't mean we're wrong or they're wrong. But to get global leaders, we need people that are educated to understand that. So how do you do that? Well, you need great institutions and things like the liberal arts. This is what the liberal arts. So I am a STEM fan. I push STEM here at the university, but we do need STEM and we do need the sciences, but at the end of the day, the liberal arts are what's going to prepare us for the future of peace, for the future of being able to critically think and assess. And the number one skill I want to see people is how to wisely, divide what's going on in the world, and decide, actually be able to go look and say, well, this is really true or not true. Because we live in a world where everything is kind of getting mixed up. And as we just have talked about, it's really hard to know what is true and not true. So how do you do that? Well, I think the liberal arts, developing really well-rounded individuals, but also I think there's got to be this leadership component kind of developed into the curriculum. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, we are developing a global curriculum as one of a project that we're working on here at the university, where we're going to weave in the ideas. Now, in our case, it's servant leadership. That's kind of our focus at the institution, but servant leadership with a global focus. And so we want people out having global internships. We want them to go abroad and everybody have a study abroad experience somewhere. I've got students that have never left Texas, and I love Texas. I mean, I'm a Texan at heart, but there's a big world out there, and they need to go out and experience that there are cities and places others that are a lot more advanced than what we have in Dallas, Texas, or New York, or any of these other cities for that matter. I mean, they're great places. And they need to see that there is a world that we need to engage with. And so that's part of the curriculum, the leadership curriculum we have to do. And I think we have to make it intentional. You talked about intentionality. Intentional that we go out and actually spend the time and effort to build global citizens, not just telling them, learn about a culture, sending everybody to Europe. Love Europe. But that is, for most of us, that's our cultural heritage. So go learn a new cultural heritage. Go find out what's going on in India. I mean, it's the biggest population on earth. You probably need to know what's going on over there, or China for that matter. So I think it's on the responsibility, especially as educators, to get people that, and we have to, at some point, are going to have to try to find a way to make that a priority. What's happening is everybody's coming out of school now with so much debt. They can't see past that. I got to go get a job immediately. I would love to see everybody take a year after they get it and go serve abroad, go study abroad, go work abroad, and take that year and then come back. And now you've got something that's great for the resume and something that's helped develop you as a leader. So,
yeah, I think that you're right. And you and I, we've talked before and share your perspective on faith and everything. And I think that's one question I want to tease out a little bit is, where does all that intersect? I mean, we think about faith or ethics or even institutional values. I think that we have to use that to kind of lead us in these decisions. Because I mean, there's a lot changing with technologies, there's a lot of changing with the global intersection of doing all this. So maybe speak briefly about just how do you see all that? You've got to have a North Star somewhere to be able to figure out where you want to go with this stuff, or you end up in the easy chair. Help me understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easier for those of us that do come from faith. As a Christian institution, we've got a pretty clear, this is where we stand. But even if you don't, I mean, I think 75% of the world is a part of a religion, and many of us ascribe to some very similar principles in terms of things like do unto others as they would have them do unto you, the golden rule, right? And so I think we have to look to ourselves and be able to say that there's something bigger than just my own greed or my own desire for getting ahead. And it's really hard in a society where we've become so individualistic. And listen, I love the ability to pull yourself up and make something of yourself, but we have to have some more community going on. And you can't really, at least in my estimation, have ethics, have social order, social connectiveness if we're not getting together. And unfortunately, the technology is actually dividing us. And boy, it's going to be interesting to see, especially with AI. People are building relationships with AI. People are isolating themselves. And the technology just continue to push us further away. And so in terms of, setting what it is that we want out of life, what is it that is what is worth living? We have to develop that as a community and decide what that is. And right now, we're so fractured. I'm not sure that there's really a single answer for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the challenges. And before we close out, I just got one last question about this, because we've been talking about the intentionality. We've been talking about technology. We've been talking about global community and a lot of change going on. I mean, there's a lot of things swirling around. But if you look just 5 years into the future, which I know sometimes when people ask me, what do you think it's going to look like in 5? I don't know. But I'm just curious, what do you think is going to define the most globally successful institutions? I mean, people that are really doing international recruitment well. What are some of those traits that you think are going to define them in the next 5 years?
I think it's the things that we find the hardest to do now. And one of those is be agile. This pace of change is so rapid and things are moving so quickly that we have institutions, and I know our faculty, my faculty is pretty accepting of really trying to work through it, but there's a lot of faculty that don't want to talk about these new technologies. They want to continue doing the things that they were. So I think the successful institutions are going to grab a hold of these things and see innovation. And I tell people, we want to embrace the chaos. Yep. Right. And so the reason I say embrace the chaos is, one, is it's going to be there whether we embrace it or not. So you might as well embrace it. But two is there is a danger in the status quo. And I think we've lived in decades of status quo. We've lived in decades where there was slow, easy progress on technology and other things and social order. And we kind of moved in that direction. I know it seemed fast, but what we're talking about now is on a different level, and we need to embrace that. And sometimes when you get out of the status quo, this is where you can actually get things done. This is where everything is shaken to its core, and we get to rebuild. And so this is the opportunity. I think institutions that can rebuild, that can go out and say, what is the need of the marketplace? How am I going to weave AI the right way into the curriculum, not AI taking jobs, not AI being used or for on the international side. I think we got too busy with internationalization that we offshored everything. Well, that wasn't good either. Now we're getting the pushback there. So we need to use some wisdom. And I think part of what we want to do, though, is to really get people to be agile with what they're doing. We need people that will be able to stop and think. That's the other thing. So here's the hard part about being agile is sometimes you don't have time to stop and think. But we need to stop and think about how is this going to affect us? How are we going to move forward? And I think we're going to have to also find new and innovative ways to be able to close some of these differences between us. And I don't know how that's going to eke out, but we've got to somehow come back together as a people, not just in the United States, but across the world, and say, what does it take to create a place of human dignity for everyone? I mean, there's something about being a human. How do we push that forward?
Randy, we end each of our conversations by asking our guests to share a piece of advice that, in your case, we would love it to be within the international or global recruitment realm of something that would move the needle, or something that someone in your shoes at another institution could put in and implement right away. So what would that piece of advice be?
Yeah, I think, in terms of international, it can be really complicated, especially right now with all the uncertainty. I think the biggest piece of advice is you need to sit down and you need to decide who you're going to be and to decide what that looks like, because you have to understand if you're going to improve your international recruitment, you have to understand what each of these cultures coming to your campus is going to do to the culture of your campus. And is that the right fit? So you may be on paper look really good. Hey, I brought in 300 students, from the Middle East, and, but that can change the entire culture, not only of your international student body, but also of your campus. So I would say, there are a lot of aggressive things we can do to go recruit. We can provide scholarships. We can be out there actively engaged. We can raise our rankings, all these things. But number one is know how it's going to impact who you are, and don't let it change who you are. Work it in so that you're supporting who you are in your mission rather than working against it.
Perfect. Love that.
We've been talking to Mr. Randy Byers, Vice President for International Affairs and Assistant Professor of Distance Learning at Dallas Baptist University. Randy, for people that would like to connect with you further, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Absolutely. Well, you're always welcome to come visit the campus here in Dallas anytime you're in the area, and we'd be happy to see you. But the easiest way to contact me is really at randy@dbu.edu. I've been around so long, I have my actual name as my email. So just randy@dbu.edu.
Wonderful. Thank you, Randy, for all the insight that you shared today.
Thank you.
Bart, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share?
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I always get really excited whenever we can talk about a number of different things and kind of overlap them. So I love the conversation about international recruitment, especially I love the agility there at the end. The idea that we have to be agile. And that's one of the things I've been really leading a lot of my AI conversations when I do presentations or master classes, that is one of the skill sets that we have to lean into, not only individually, but also just corporately, is we have to be okay with change management. We have to be okay with being agile, because that's not going to be an option anymore. And so I love that conversation. I just love being able to kind of talk about just the mindset that it takes to do AI well. And so this was a lot of fun. So Randy, thanks so much for being a part of this today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Bart. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us for another episode of The Higher Ed Marketer. If you found this conversation helpful, please share it with a colleague and follow us on LinkedIn at The Higher Ed Marketer. The podcast is brought to you by Kaler Solutions, your trusted partner in higher ed branding, enrollment strategy, and mission fit marketing. We look forward to seeing you next time.
The Higher Ed Marketer podcast is proud to be a part of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast Network. Discover even more conversations, resources, and tools to help you grow your institution at thehigheredmarketer.com. Your go-to community for all things higher ed marketing and leadership.